There is something strange about Patrick Jane. He can walk into a room where everyone is nervous, everyone is lying, and everyone is trying to figure out what is happening. And somehow he's smiling. No matter how serious the situation gets, Jane almost never looks like the most stressed person in the room. He's usually the opposite. He's relaxed, he's sarcastic, he's drinking tea, and somehow, 5 minutes later, everyone else has exposed themselves, while Jane is standing there looking like he already knew how the entire conversation was going to end. And maybe that is one of the reasons so many men love The Mentalist. Not because it is a detective show, not even because Patrick Jane is intelligent. It is because Jane represents something much more specific, control. And the interesting part is that Jane almost never has to look powerful to be powerful. Jane doesn't try to look dangerous. Think about most television characters who are supposed to be powerful. They usually have to show you they are physically intimidating, they are aggressive, they raise their voice. They walk into a room and everyone immediately knows they are the strongest person there. Jane does almost none of that. He smiles, he jokes, he acts distracted. Sometimes he looks like he isn't even taking the situation seriously. And that is exactly what makes him intimidating. Because when everyone else is trying to control the room, Jane doesn't have to. He already understands it. That is why one of the most satisfying things about The Mentalist is watching someone underestimate him. A suspect thinks Jane is harmless. The police thinks he's being annoying. Someone thinks they have successfully lied to him. And Jane just sits there, waiting, because he isn't trying to win the argument. He's trying to understand the person having it. And once he understands them, the game is basically over. Jane's real superpower isn't reading minds. The show is called The Mentalist, so it is easy to think Jane's greatest ability is reading people, but that is not really what makes him interesting. His real advantage is that he understands behavior. He notices tiny things, where someone looks, what they touch, what they avoid, how they react to a particular name, what changes when they think nobody is watching. And then he uses those observations to create situations where people reveal themselves. That is a completely different kind of intelligence. Jane doesn't always need to know the answer. Sometimes he only needs to know how to make you give him the answer. And that is much more interesting. Because it means his intelligence isn't just about knowing more than everyone else. It is about understanding people better than they understand themselves. And then there's the calm. This is where the whole low cortisol joke becomes almost perfect for Jane. Because if there were a fictional character who looked like he had absolutely no cortisol, it would probably be Patrick Jane. Someone is pointing a gun at him. He'll probably make a joke. Someone is accusing him of murder. He'll make tea. A dangerous criminal is sitting directly across from him. Jane might be more interested in the furniture. Obviously, this isn't literally how cortisol works. But the joke captures something real about the character. Jane almost never gives other people emotional control over him. And that is incredibly satisfying to watch. Because most people understand what it's like to lose control of a situation. You get nervous. You overthink. You say something you didn't mean to say. You react emotionally. And suddenly, the other person has the advantage. Jane almost never does that. Even when he is emotionally destroyed inside, he tries to maintain control of what he shows. And that makes his moments of vulnerability much more powerful. Because when Jane finally loses his composure, you know it actually means something. But Jane isn't just the perfect man. And this is where The Mentalist becomes more interesting than a simple male power fantasy. Because Jane is deeply damaged. The same intelligence that makes him impressive is also connected to one of the worst things that ever happened to him. His arrogance, his confidence, his ability to manipulate people. All of those things helped him become successful as a fake psychic. And eventually, they contributed to his confrontation with Red John. Jane thought he understood people. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. And Red John showed him that he wasn't. That destroyed him. So underneath the calm, funny, confident man is someone carrying an enormous amount of guilt. And this changes the way we see his confidence. Jane isn't calm because nothing affects him. He's calm because he has learned to live with the things that would completely destroy most people. That is a much more interesting kind of a strength. Jane also doesn't need everyone to like him. Another reason Jane is so satisfying to watch, he doesn't constantly seek approval. He annoys people, he breaks rules, he ignores authority, he manipulates suspects. He does things that Lisbon absolutely does not want him to do. And yet he rarely seems desperate to prove that he is right. He simply does what he thinks will work. This creates an interesting contrast with a lot of modern protagonists. Jane doesn't need to dominate every conversation. He doesn't need to win every argument. Sometimes he lets people think they are smarter. And that's actually part of his strategy. Because if you need everyone to know you're intelligent, you're giving them information about yourself. Jane understands something different. The smartest person in the room doesn't always need to look like the smartest person in the room. And then Lisbon enters the equation. But there's one person who constantly disrupts Jane's control, Lisbon. And this is important, because if Jane were completely untouchable, he would eventually become boring. Lisbon gives the character a limit. Jane can read suspects, he can manipulate criminals, he can fool police officers, but Lisbon understands Jane in a different way. She knows when he's lying, she knows when he's hiding something, she knows when he's pretending not to care, and most importantly, she knows when Jane is going too far. That is why their relationship works so well. Jane spends most of the series trying to control other people around him. Lisbon is one of the few people who can actually push back. But she doesn't beat him at his own game by becoming smarter than him. She does it by understanding him. And that is something Jane can't simply manipulate away. So if you put everything together, the appeal of Patrick Jane isn't simply he's smart. Lots of characters are smart. It is a combination. He's intelligent, but doesn't constantly show it. He's confident, but doesn't need to look physically intimidating. He's funny, but the humor often hides something darker. He's calm, but that calmness comes from enormous emotional damage. He manipulates people, but he's also capable of forming genuine relationships. And most importantly, he is always trying to maintain control, while knowing that there is something he can never control, his past. So maybe the reason so many men enjoy The Mentalist isn't really about solving murders. Maybe it is not even about the mystery. Maybe it is the fantasy of walking into a chaotic situation and not being overwhelmed by it. Being able to look at a person and understand what they are really thinking. Being able to stay calm when everyone else is losing control. Being underestimated. And then quietly proving that you were 3 steps ahead the entire time. That is Patrick Jane. And the funny thing is, the more you watch the show, the more you realize that his greatest strength isn't that he can read everyone else. It is that he learned how to hide what he's feeling himself. And maybe that is why the smile is so important. Because Jane is almost always smiling. Even when he's angry, even when he's afraid, even when he's remembering his family. And sometimes, even when he's completely broken. The smile isn't proof that Jane doesn't feel anything. It is proof that he refuses to let everyone else decide what he gets to feel. And that is probably the most Patrick Jane thing about him. He doesn't need to be the strongest in the room, he just needs to understand the room. And once he does, everyone else is already playing his game.